Hello friends, welcome again. Friends, today in this video we want to discuss P.B. Shelley as a poet with special reference to his poem A Lament. Friends, before we discuss this poem, I want to give you some brief idea about Shelley as a poet. After having introduced the poet, I will discuss the poem A Lament stanza wise and line wise. Then we will discuss the most important idea or the theme presented by the poet, and then also we will discuss the meter used by the poet, the rhyming scheme, and the poetic devices used by Shelley in this poem. Friends, this poet P.B. Shelley, his full name is Percy B.C. Shelley. This poet, Shelley, was born in 1792 and died in 1822. He lived a very short life of 30 years, but he became an immortal poet of English literature. P.B. Shelley was the most important poet, a prominent poet of the period of Romantic Revival. Friends, Romantic Revival means the period from 1798 to 1830 is considered as the golden period in the history of English literature. This period is mainly known for Neo-Romanticism, a new movement which was started the new movement of Romanticism in English poetry, which was heralded by William Wordsworth and S.T. Coleridge. Friends, S.T. Coleridge, William Wordsworth, John Keats, and P.B. Shelley. These are the four important pillars on which the whole empire of English poetry during the period of Romantic Revival exists. And that's why, P.B. Shelley, along with other three poets as I mentioned just now, is considered as an extraordinary poet, extraordinary literary personality of this age of Romantic Revival. He was one of the most highly regarded and the most influential poet of the 19th century. P.B. Shelley and his poetry has influenced so many other poets who lived after him during the 19th and 20th century. If I talk about the most important works, poems written by P.B. Shelley, then they are: number 1, Ode to the West Wind; number 2, The Mask of Anarchy; number 3, Ozymandias; Music to a Skylark; The Cloud; Adonis; The Triumph of Life; The Revolt of Islam, and many more. These are the major works of P.B. Shelley as a poet in the beginning of the 19th century. Okay, so the major romantic elements which we find in his poetry are his love for nature, his use of imagination, the power of imagination in his poetry, the element of melancholy. Melancholy means sadness or sorrow or grief that we find in his poetry, the element of supernaturalism and Hellenism and beauty are also found in most of his poetry. And the most important thing to note about Shelley's poetry is the element of subjectivity. Subjectivity means the expression of personal feelings. Shelley's most poems are subjective by nature. That means Shelley tries to express his personal emotions, his personal experiences in his poetry, and that makes his poetry personal or subjective poetry. And this is one of the characteristics of all the romantic poetry written in the beginning of the 19th century. Now, friends, after having introduced the poet and his important qualities as a poet, now let's start the discussion of this poem, A Lament. Friends, first of all, let's try to understand the meaning of the title. The title, A Lament. Lament means to grieve. To grieve means to express sorrow or express disappointment, to express sadness. So, from the title itself, as a reader, we come to know that P.B. Shelley has tried to express his sorrow, his sadness, his disappointment in this poem. In this poem, it is not much clear exactly what he is grieving at. Okay, why he is so sorrowful or why he is so sad, that is not clearly mentioned in the poem. So we have some questions in our mind. Is he expressing his sorrow for the death of somebody who has died? Okay, or is he grieving the loss of natural life because of industrialization? Because P.B. Shelley was living in England in the period of industrialization, and during this period, because of urbanization, people had lost the sense of nature. So the loss of natural life or loss of the life in the lap of nature, perhaps the poet is grieving this loss in this poem. We are not sure. Okay, so it is the question actually up to the readers to ponder, to think over about these questions. Okay, it is now this poem, A Lament, is a very short lyric written only in two stanzas of 5 lines each. That means there are only two stanzas and 10 lines. Okay, and the rhyming scheme of this poem in both the stanzas is A A B A B. Okay, and this poem is written in iambic foot. Iambic foot means this foot has two syllables in which the first syllable is unstressed and the second syllable is stressed. That means it has a rising rhythm from unstressed to stressed. Okay, so this poem has a rising rhythm. The rhyming scheme is A A B A B in both the stanzas. Each stanza has 5 lines, so there are only 10 lines in this poem. So friends, now let's try to understand the poem line-wise. Stanza 1. O world, O life, O time, on whose last steps I climb, trembling at that where I had stood before, when will return the glory of your prime? No more, no more, never more. So this is how the poet expresses his sorrow by the words no more or never more. Okay? In this stanza, the poet addresses the world, the life, and the time in the first line. He calls or he invokes or he addresses the world, the life, and the time, and he expresses his sad mood in the first stanza. When the poet says, When will return the glory of your prime? When he asks this question, to the world, life and time, he is actually asking about whether his joy, the beauty of nature will come back or not. This question he is asking to the world, to time and to life. That means here the poet wants to say that he used to live a life of glory in past, and now he has lost that glory, he has lost that happiness and joy. So perhaps you can say that the poet is grieving, the poet is expressing his sorrow for this loss of glory or the loss of joy which he used to enjoy in his past life. He believes that the ancient glory of the world will never return. So kind of a pessimistic approach is found in this first stanza. Okay, the poet has no hope that the time will change. The last line of the first stanza, no more, ah, nevermore. This line suggests that he has no ray of hope. So, the whole first stanza is full of pessimism. Okay, now let's read the second stanza. The second stanza says, out of the day and night a joy has taken flight. Out of the day and night a joy has taken flight. Fresh spring and summer and winter to hear. Move my faint heart with grief but with delight. No more, ah, nevermore. So friends, in this second stanza, the poet says that out of the day and night, the joy has taken flight. That means the joy has evaporated, the joy has disappeared. Okay, the joy has flown away, just like a bird flies away. Here he wants to say that the joy which used to brighten the night as well as the day has departed, has gone away. Neither the day nor the night brings with it any joy for the poet. So for the poet, all days and nights are similar, right? The days and the nights, they give him sorrow and the joy has flown away. Further, the poet says that even the spring, the summer, or the winter do not make him happy. All seasons, bring him only sadness, grief, and sorrow. Seasons change, but his heart remains filled with the same sense of sorrow or grief. So, friends, all in all, you can say in both the stanzas, P.B. Shelley, the romantic poet of the 19th century, has expressed his sorrow for the loss of something, for the loss of the joy which he used to enjoy in his past times. Okay, if I talk about the theme, then let me tell you that here the major idea expressed by the poet is loss of glory or happiness. This poem, A Lament, expresses Shelley's emotion of grief or sorrow. It presents the poet's feeling of the loss of happiness. Shelley was living during the time of industrialization, during the time of urbanization, and perhaps he is talking about the loss of the natural life which the people used to live before industrialization started. Okay, so the poem, all in all, you can say it is full of pessimism and sorrow, and he has no hope for the bright days. But we may argue that poet is missing the idea that change is the essence of life. Okay? One must be hopeful in life. Though we understand that Shelley has no hope, but when we talk about our own practical life, remember, friends, that change is the essence of life. If you are passing from bad days nowadays, then definitely good days are going to come. Why? Because Shelley himself has written another poem, a ode to the west wind. In this poem, Shelley himself has written this line, "If winter comes, can spring be far behind?" So that means the poet wants to say, so what if the winter comes? If the winter comes, no problem. Winter means bad days, okay? The days of sorrow. But so what if the winter comes? Spring always follows winter. Winter is always followed by the spring. So spring stands for good days, the days of joy. So change is the essence of life, which Shelley himself has expressed in his other poem, Ode to the West. So now, friends, let's discuss the poetic devices as used by Shelley in this poem. First of all, as you can see here on the screen, apostrophe, which is a figure of speech, is used by Shelley in this poem. In this figure of speech, the poet invokes or addresses someone. So if you read the first line, Shelley addresses the world, the life, and the time. So this is an example of apostrophe in English poetry. Another figure of speech or poetic device that we see here is alliteration. Okay, if you read the fourth line of the poem, when will, these words are used where the sound wa is repeated two times. So when the consonant sounds are repeated in the same line, it is called the use of alliteration, which you find in this poem. Another poetic device which you find here is refrain. Okay, and refrain means the repetition of the same line through the whole poem. As I told you, this poem is written in two stanzas. In both the stanzas, this last line, no more, ah, never more, this line is repeated by Shelley. So you can say he has used refrain also in this poem. And another figure of speech that we find here is personification. Friends, personification is a figure of speech in which, non-living things are presented as living things. Okay, so non-living things are given some human qualities or human characteristics in the poem by the poet. It is mainly used, personification is mainly used by the poets to give some extra effect to the poem. Here, if you read this line, a joy has taken flight. Here, the feeling of joy, is presented as flying, just like a bird. Okay, bird is living, but the feeling of joy is not living. Feeling of joy is an abstract feeling which you cannot see or which cannot fly. But the poet has presented it as if the joy is flying. Okay, so that is also another example of a figure of speech called personification. So all in all, you can say that the poetic devices like apostrophe, alliteration, personification, and refrain are used by P.B. Shelley in this poem. Friends, let me conclude the whole discussion by saying that A Lament is a masterpiece written by a master writer, a master poet of the period of Romantic revival. In this poem, Shelley has mainly expressed his sense of loss of joy or the loss of glory. This poem is full of pessimism. However, as a reader, we must understand that pessimism is not good in life. Change is the essence of life. You know, if winter comes, can spring be far behind? If we are passing from bad days now, definitely good days are going to come. Okay, so friends, here we end up this discussion. Thank you very much. If you have any questions or doubts, do write to me in the comment section of this channel. Thank you again.